True Opinion Podcast.
Hey y'all, welcome to the first episode of This Is Effed Up, the true crime companion podcast to True Opinion. Before we begin, I want to caution you to exercise discretion when listening to this episode. Graphic descriptions concerning violent acts of a sexual nature toward a child will be discussed. So again, listener discretion is strongly advised. Okay, so when the media refers to crime and violence in Chicago, they are referring to crimes that happen in Black and brown neighborhoods. When the true crime history of Chicago is referenced, white men are brought up, discussed, and analyzed and glamorized. Al Capone and Scarface, and numerous books, movies, and documentaries exist dedicated to his reign of terror that left the streets of Chicago bloody. Leopold and Loeb were spoiled and bored rich kids that wanted to kill just to prove their intellectual superiority, which was, of course, a fail. H. Holmes, he was just a con man and grifter that lured women to his hotel and murdered them in its depths in sadistic ways, and often sold their skeletons to medical schools. John Wayne Gacy, just a loud and obnoxious blowhard that could not reconcile his homosexual desires with the expectations that his father had of him. So he raped and murdered young boys and put their bodies in the crawl space of his home. Mediocre, entitled, violent, and just plain evil white folks commit horrible crimes in this city and are given the celebrity criminal treatment. In Black neighborhoods, the violence is less glamorized because it's more nuanced, and it's the direct result of racism, poverty, and a lack of education and job opportunities. You know, all those yucky, icky realities that the masses don't really want to hear about. From the first time that the first slave ships reached these shores, Black people have been the de facto inferior race. Others that voluntarily arrive here instantly align themselves with white people and think of Black people as the violent enemy in America. So, all crime is just written off as just what happens in Black neighborhoods and to Black people. It's a punishment for simply being here and trying to live and thrive. In 1997, a horrific crime took place in Chicago, and the victim was a little Black girl. First, the case was given little attention, but soon the city and eventually the world would come to care about the fate of Shatoya Curry, who would be known as Girl X to protect her identity for years. She became the city's daughter, and apprehending the monster that changed her life became top priority. In taking down a monster, though, careers rose and fell, and battles were fought privately, in the media, and in court. But in the end, justice would be served. Maybe. The events unfold in the infamous Cabrini-Green housing project, arguably the most recognized name in urban horror stories. Remember Candyman? Yeah, that was Cabrini-Green. The buildings were constructed as affordable housing for the city's low-income families on the north side. It began as a community of families, but quickly drugs and gang violence turned the projects into a dangerous place to live. And despite the work of residents, community groups, and activism, the buildings fell into disrepair. The influence of gangs spread, and violence became a common occurrence. Cabrini-Green was situated at the intersection of two affluent neighborhoods in Chicago, Lincoln Park and the Gold Coast. So imagine a very crime-ridden area, compound, right in the middle of two very rich, very white, money type neighborhoods. Prime real estate. I'll tell you, spoiler alert, Cabrini-Green is gone today, and you can bet it's a lot of other things they're making money. But I digress. Anyway, so The compound had high rises, which were the William Green homes, and then the row houses, the Francis Cabrini homes. So Cabrini-Green. Okay. In the high rise at 1121 North Larrabee Street on January 9th, 1997, a 9-year-old fourth grade girl left the second floor apartment of a friend where she had spent the night to walk to her grandmother's unit on the 6th floor. She would not arrive and instead would be found lying face down in the 7th floor stairway by a CHA employee at 10:25 a.m. with a rag partially around her neck and face. The worker, Therese Miller, went to nearby apartments to see if anyone knew the little girl. Sharon Thompson and Mary Johnson recognized the girl and moved her from the stairwell to the couch in Johnson's apartment. At this point, the little girl was foaming at the mouth and her eyes had rolled back into her head. Her pants were down. Her underclothes were down. They were down around her ankles. And her t-shirt was tied around her neck and there was blood on her shirt. She was not wearing any shoes. And there appeared to be gang signs written on her stomach in blue or black marker. 911 was called and the little girl was transported to Children's Memorial Hospital. She was unresponsive, cold, and rigid, and there were red marks on her neck. At 11:17, she got to the emergency room and she was barely breathing and comatose. Okay, her injuries included, this is kind of rough, so skip ahead like 30 seconds or so if you need to. So her injuries included red marks and petechiae, which is a sign of strangulation. When her clothes were removed, she had fresh puncture wounds, abrasions, and lacerations on her back. She had blood in her mouth. Clotted blood obscured her hymen. There were gang signs on her abdomen. And she showed signs of severe brain damage. Okay. So, an article from March 2nd, 1997 in the Spokesman Review, which is a newspaper. It's an out-of-town newspaper. It's not native to Chicago or Illinois. But I just wanted to throw this in here that this newspaper described her injuries as her having a smashed skull. It said she had been forced to drink gasoline and she had gang emblems scribbled all over her body. So I put that there just to kind of show you like what was being reported and what like official documents say like the injuries were. Okay. All right. So where was I? Okay. So the little girl, she was admitted to the pediatric ICU, of course, where a nurse alerted the doctor of a foul smell coming from the drainage tube. The smell was of gasoline or something similar, and the contents were collected and turned over to the police for testing. The case initially received little press besides a 5-paragraph story kind of buried in the Metro section of the Tribune. On January 25th, Lee Bay of the Chicago Sun-Times, which is, the other paper in Chicago, wrote a piece that told the story and also blasted Chicago for its indifference at the horrible tragedy that had befallen this girl. So news outlets all over the city, state, country, and eventually the world picked up the story. And as the attention rose, so did the pressure to find the perpetrator. So here we go. Here's CPD. This is their response. So detectives canvassed the projects and as many as 125 different police officers worked on the case. That's a lot, right? Seems like a lot could it's a lot of paper, a lot of reports, a lot could probably get mixed up and shuffled, but okay, let's just get through it. All right. So a list of suspects was generated and it included 37 names. And even though gang signs had been written on the little girl, there was no gang connection found. So basically, in that building, the GDs were in control and the marks on her body were allegedly, GD symbols. And I saw some documentation that kind of alluded to the fact that like they did their own internal investigation to see if any one of them was responsible for this. And they kind of came back like, yeah, we didn't do this. Like, you're not going to put this on us. Like, our guys didn't do this. So, okay, now let's get back into it. According to court documents, in mid-March 1997, another team of detectives was assigned to the case. So throw out the 125. Yeah, that was work. Throw them out, put them in the trash. Let's bring in some more guys. So here comes the new team, and they're from intelligence and organized crime. So they reviewed the previous documents. Like I said, they reviewed the previous documents. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they reviewed every piece of paper that all those 125, let's say only 75 of them wrote anything down about the case. I'm sure they reviewed all of that. Yeah, all of it. So they started going through everything, and they discovered discrepancies in the statements of a man that was interviewed, and his name was Patrick Sykes. So the dogs have a bone, y'all. So at the time of the crime, Patrick Sykes was living in apartment 504 with his girlfriend. When detectives went to interview him, they were told by his former girlfriend that he had moved out and could be found at an address on Maypole where he was living with another woman. On April 1st, detectives found Sykes and took him to the Area 3 police station. Patrick Sykes would never be free again. He would be interviewed extensively by detectives. Sykes was given a lie detector test. He had evidence collected from his person. Law enforcement maintains that Sykes was read his Miranda rights several times, and they said that he signed waivers to his Miranda rights multiple times. They also maintained that he was treated well, he was fed, he was allowed to sleep, and he was given his cigarettes and his Dilantin, which is a seizure medication. Okay, so at 2:30 a.m., after being with the police all day, Detective Wheat, he left the room and he told Detective Calabrese that the defendant was confessing to the crime. So they picked him up at about, maybe about 8 a.m., 8 or 9 a.m., and he was there all day. And 2:30 a.m., so the next morning, he started confessing. Okay. So, like I said, he was picked up on April 1st, taken to Area 3 at 9:30, and then at approximately 1:30, he gave a handwriting sample. At 2:30, now this is 2:30 p.m., he was interviewed again about his whereabouts the morning of the attack on Girl X. At 5 p.m., he spoke with the detective again and was told that his alibi for that day could not be substantiated. My neighbor's dogs are going fucking nuts. Oh my gosh. Sorry. They're going nuts. They usually don't do this. But I guess I'm usually not even home at this time to know what they do. But they are going bananas over there. Okay. They're so cute though. Okay. So he was told his alibi could not be substantiated. At 6:30 p.m., he was taken to 11th and State and given a polygraph exam. He arrived back at Area 3 before 10 p.m., and at 11:30, he was informed that the results of the polygraph revealed deception. So at 2:30 a.m., so this will be the next day, he began confessing to the crime. At 3:15 a.m., another detective joined in the interview. So, court documents, again, kind of outline what happened to Sykes while he was with the police. They say on April 2nd at 8:30 a.m., he was given food, drink, and cigarettes. At 11:15, he was given some pizza, and he talked to detectives again for another 20 or 25 minutes. They're making sure that you know the whole time that he's there, he's treated well, he's fed. I don't see where it says he slept, but okay. They say they were on the up and up. Okay. So now at 12:15 p.m., he was questioned about portions of his statement regarding what he allegedly sprayed in the victim's mouth and why. All right. So afternoon. So probably around that 12:15 time, maybe simultaneously, Robert Buckley enters the station. He is the assistant state's attorney, and he assisted the police in preparing search warrants. At 3:30, Sykes was again interviewed by detectives and ASA Buckley for 30 to 45 minutes. Sykes wanted to make another statement, and ASA Buckley wrote it out, and Sykes and the detective signed it. At 6:30 p.m., he identified a can of roach spray that allegedly was used during the crime. Then shortly after midnight on April 3rd, Buckley again talked to Sykes alone, and at 1 a.m., Buckley wrote out Sykes' statement. All right. So, the handwritten statement produced by Buckley at 1 a.m. stated, in part, that Sykes lived in apartment 504 with his then girlfriend. He saw the little girl walking upstairs wearing a pair of pants and a white shirt. He grabbed her, pulled her into the apartment, and locked the door. He pulled her to the couch in the front room, pulled her pants down, and inserted his right index finger into her vagina and rear end. He then tried to insert his penis into her vagina, but she began crying. He then put his penis in her mouth. She sucked on it for about a minute and then began screaming. He put his hand over her mouth, but she kept screaming, and so he put his hands around her neck and began choking her. He smelled and saw her go into the bathroom on herself and saw feces coming out of her. He choked her until she stopped screaming. He then set her down on the floor and pulled her pants up. He went to the front door and looked out. Then he hoisted her over his shoulder and carried her to a place in the stairwell between the 6th and 7th floors. He then set her down and used a marker he found to write gang signs on her abdomen. He left the girl and went to the abandoned apartment on the 2nd floor to look for something to spray into the girl's mouth because he was afraid that he had left, quote, something, end quote, in her mouth when he removed his penis. He found some roach spray and sprayed it in her mouth, and he left her spitting up with foam coming out of her mouth to return the spray. At 3:30 p.m., ASA Buckley had another conversation with Sykes, and Sykes gave another statement in which he stated that some of his previous statements had been untrue. He said he got the roach spray from the apartment he was living in with his then girlfriend, and that he had lied because he did not want to get her in trouble. He also said that he also put his foot across the girl's throat. He wrote GD on the girl for gangster disciples and a pitchfork in hopes of blaming the crime on a gang member. Sykes was transferred to jail to await trial, and he was held on a $6 million bond. So the trial starts in the year 2000, and the star witness for the prosecution is Girl X herself, Shatoya Curry. Unable to see or talk, Curry testified using an eye gaze system with the assistance of her speech-language pathologist. Shatoya painstakingly relayed some of the details of her attack and indicated that Patrick Sykes was the man that had committed the crime. Sykes himself also took the stand in his own defense. He testified that he was not guilty of the crime. He had been coerced into signing a confession statement after he had had a seizure. Sykes said that he had never been given his Dilantin during the 56-hour ordeal at the police station. In fact, he said that after he had a seizure in a holding cell, detectives picked him up, splashed water on his face, and gave him a paper to sign. Patrick Sykes was found guilty and sentenced to 120 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections, where he remains to this day. So that's it. That is the survival story of Shatoya Curry. But is that the whole story? Was justice served for Shatoya? When I first started researching this story, I was sure it would be like open and shut, slam dunk, a case that would be simple to tell in that, it had a story, a definite end, a perpetrator was locked up, victim survived, like it would be a horrific story to tell, but just a complete story nonetheless. But as I started getting into it more, there were like some glaring red flags. Like I had a lot of questions, things I couldn't ignore. Even in recording right now and reading through the script that I wrote for this episode, I'm like, wait a minute, something else clicked in my head. It said the witnesses said when they found her pants and her underwear were down. And then in the statement that ASA Buckley wrote out for Sykes, the last statement that I was reading, he says he pulled her underwear up and then put her in the stairwell. So it's just like, little things like that are small, and could be easily missed. Like really, a lot of small things could add up to something big, something being reasonable doubt, so, but, nevertheless, I had a lot of questions. So I'm going to go through a few of them. Questions, statements, just, like things about this case that didn't immediately sit right with me. So she was found at 10:25 in the stairwell face down, but all indications are that, if he left her there, he left her face up. He says he put her over his shoulder and carried her out, unless he would have just like dropped her face down. If you have somebody over your shoulder, their face is to your back. And when you lay them down, you would lay them on their back. And if he supposedly wrote these gang signs on her, she would have to be face up. And then when he took the time to roll her over, maybe he could have. Next thing, she was cold and barely alive when the ambulance arrived within minutes and in a coma by the time she reached the ED. She was found at 10:25 and then she got to the emergency department at 11:17. And so I did, my Googles, and it's like an approximate 9-minute drive between the building and the hospital. So to me, it seems like a lot of lost time. Okay, so she was moved from the stairway to a couch inside an apartment that compromises the evidence, the crime scene. Like, how long was she inside that apartment? Who was in contact with her while she was in that apartment? Could they have, thinking like, oh my gosh, maybe trying to clean her up? Did they wash her face? Did they wash her hands? Did they try to give her water? Did they pull her clothes up? What happened? Like, so much could have happened to so much evidence with her being moved from that stairway into that apartment. So it says that we can assume that one or both of these women recognized this little girl when Tari Miller alerted them that she was in the stairway. And so if they were familiar with her, did they know her family? Did they know her grandma? Did they go get her grandmother? If they did, what was her grandma's reaction? Did grandma contact the people in the apartment where she had spent the night? Like, who all was notified? Who came up to this apartment to see this girl, to see what state she was in? Was January 9th a school day? Maybe. When she didn't show up to get ready for school, was the grandmother alarmed? What time did all of this take place? Was anybody looking for her? And if they were, how did they miss her? So how are we even certain that she never made it to the grandmother's apartment? Because I'm like, if she didn't show up to get ready for school, wouldn't grandma be alarmed? So maybe she made it there. Maybe something could have happened inside the apartment. Do we know who lived there, who frequented there? Was grandma's apartment ever searched? What about the apartment where she spent the night? Was it searched? Who else was there? Who else lived there? Who frequented there? Who had access in and out of the apartment? The fact that there was some sort of poison or something poured down her throat, was that, an effort to get rid of evidence like they had Patrick Sykes say, but maybe if the perpetrator maybe had like a familial DNA match to her, or maybe if they had been arrested for a crime, period, before and had their DNA collected, they knew they would be in the system. So they tried to get rid of any evidence. But also that could apply to Patrick Sykes because he did have a conviction for a sex crime, which, they just say a sex crime. It doesn't get specific into what it was in the articles and stuff that I went through. But, that about destroying evidence, that's what he said. And it could actually apply to him. So, that's the thing about this case. The questions can be kind of explained away and they can fit with what Patrick said, or it could be like maybe this happened and that detail wasn't told. But then, it's kind of like, no, man, but I don't know. This is kind of effed up. Like, these questions, they're small, but they matter, they amount to something. So let's see what else. I had more questions and statements and things going through my head. Her injuries were described as severe brain damage due to her skull being crushed, right? Well, court documents say there was evidence of severe brain damage. That article, that little detail from that article said that her skull had been crushed, right? But like, what accounted for that injury? I didn't remember seeing anything that said like maybe she was hit or beat or, God, this is like horrible to talk about. But what accounts for that severe brain damage? Like, what accounts for that injury? And then just the fact that she had some evidence of severe brain damage. She was in a coma for about a month, and then she's able to be taught to use a communication system with 100% accuracy. Being 9 years old, after waking up from a coma, understanding somehow that you can't see or talk anymore, having some sort of severe brain damage, her cognition was intact enough to respond with 100% accuracy. Like, it's possible. It is completely possible. Is it probable? I don't know. I don't think so. But, it's possible. And then, I had questions about how she even lost her eyesight and her speech. Her eyesight, like, that kind of goes back to some sort of trauma in the brain, because I was thinking like there would have had to be damage to the optic nerve in the occipital lobe, which is at the back of the head. So maybe if her head had been banged up against something hard, like the floor, somebody banged her head hard on the floor or hit her with something with enough force, it could cause enough damage to, I was just trying to, it was very terrible, y'all. I was just trying to think of ways in which this baby could get brain damage that would knock out her eyesight. It's terrible to even think about. Oh my gosh, it's terrible. But, honestly, even me saying like, oh my God, this is terrible to think about. It's terrible to ask these questions. It's terrible to be looking for the exact, precise details that account for all these injuries. And, and perhaps it was so terrible to ask these questions that they were never asked, because who really wants to know this? Who really wants to find this out? But in the pursuit of like the truth, these are things that we need to know. And like, yeah, it feels pretty fucking gross to be asking these questions, because even to me, it kind of feels like I'm defending something and I'm calling into question, this little girl, this survivor, and these people that helps her. But, the point in me doing this is not like, I'm not running an innocence project. I'm not an investigative journalist or anything like that. I just have a sick fascination, a love, or I don't know, like for stories and for true crime stories. And so I wanted to do this and I wanted to tell this story. And it's just like I said, like things just didn't sound right. And so this being the city of Chicago and this case being so high profile and, this city having a history and a legacy of police abuse and corruption from the mayor's office to the state's attorney's office. It cannot be done justice without asking these questions. And it really makes me think, like, this is not about Patrick Sykes getting him out. It's not about that. It's really just about Shatoya. And if, because Anita Alvarez made her name on this case, she wrote this all the way to the state's attorney's office. And if everybody feels better because they think, a monster is off the street, was it worth it? And I say no, because that means that justice was never done for this girl, that this case was kind of cloaked in that attention that those other horrible white people get from this city. Like it got all of the attention and kind of the star treatment. There was so much scandal and intrigue going on with it. But at the end of the day, like, if this man didn't do it, or if he didn't do it, or if there is like such serious doubt, that means that there was no justice for this girl. That all of that was just farce and lies, like pretending that it was about Shatoya and it was really about maybe a young prosecutor riding a wave to the top job. Maybe it was about covering up the deficiencies of the Chicago Housing Authority, because this yet another horrible, tragic thing happened at Cabrini-Green. Maybe this was going to be used as impetus to start tearing down the buildings. There's just so much political clout. There's just so much money. There's just so much at stake. And it's just drenched in this little girl's blood. And I know that sounds dramatic, but at what cost? And the cost was Shatoya, because her life was forever changed and altered. And, there are serious questions about this man and whether or not he did this. And I don't know how it's going to shake out, but what was going to be one episode is going to be the first season of This Is Effed Up, where I'm going to try to go through this case and get as many details and try to answer as many of those questions that I had, that maybe you had, as I can. I mean, guys, come on, the police destroyed the evidence before the appeals were done. I think maybe even before the trial. I have to go back and look. I'll tell y'all about it in an upcoming episode. But any physical evidence that was collected has been destroyed. So it cannot be tested or retested for DNA or anything. Yeah. So all of that was destroyed even before all his appeals were done. So, I mean, it's just so many little things that aren't little things like that surround this case. And like I said, I'm going to try to get through all of them. And so I want y'all to stay tuned to the True Opinion feed. for drops of This Is Effed Up. And if you got some questions, you want to talk about this, you got your own opinions, you can get social with me on IG at True Opinion Podcast or Twitter at True Opinion Show. And that's it. All right. Bye, y'all.